Hello everyone, this is your biology teacher from your YouTube channel. Welcome back to your next video lecture of your chapter 2nd, that is reproduction in flowering plants. In last video lectures we had discussed about the male reproductive gamete and female reproductive gamete separately, and the overall male reproductive system and the female reproductive system of a flower. So in this video I am going to discuss you the topic pollination, because before the process of fertilization there is a need of pollination in flowering plants, because it is essential or necessary to reach pollen grain to the female gametophyte for fertilization. So in the process of reproduction in flowering plants, there is a need of pollination. So what do you mean by pollination? Question arises in your mind. Pollination is a process where pollen grain is delivered from the male reproductive organ, that is anther, to the female reproductive organ, that is stigma, to fertilize a plant. In flowering plants, when the pollen grain lands on the stigma, it will quickly germinate, then create a pollen tube. Sperm cell travel down this tube to the ovary to fertilize a waiting egg. Or we can say the simply transfer of pollen grain from the anther to the stigma is called pollination. As we know, pollen grains are immobile, or they cannot move from one place to another place. They can't reach themselves to stigma, so we need some external efforts to provide them that they can reach to the stigma, the female reproductive organ. These external efforts can be wind, water, animal, gravity, growth contact. It could be anything that is suitable for this particular species or particular a plant, a flower, shape, size and the type of flower. So these external transporter of pollen grain are called pollinating agents, as I told you. So now I am going to tell about the type of pollination. There are two main type of pollination, that is self pollination and cross pollination. As you can see in this diagram here, this is diagram of self pollination and this is diagram of cross pollination. First of all, I am going to discuss you the first type of pollination, that is self pollination. What is self pollination? Self pollination is a transfer of pollen grains from the anther of a flower to the stigma of the either same or genetically similar flower, or the same or the different flower of the same plant. There are many types of cell pollination also, that is autogamy and geotogamy. The main two type of self pollination, that is autogamy and geotogamy. So I would like to tell you what is autogamy and what is geotogamy. What do you understand from the word that is autogamy? Auto means self and gamy means fusing two different things. Auto means self and gamy means fusion. So autogamy means self fusion. In this method, the perfect flower or the intersexual flower, you know about intersexual flower or perfect flower, in which both male and female reproductive part are present, that is called perfect flower, is pollinated by its own pollen. When the perfect flower is pollinated by its own pollen, or we can say that its stigma is pollinated by its own anther. It is possible only when anther and stigma are close together. Okay, as you can see in this diagram, here the anther and here the stigma. If these anther pollinate its own stigma, then that is called autogamy, the type of self pollination. So I hope you understand it, you get it clearly. So there are three types of autogamy also: the homogamy, clastogamy, and bud pollination that I mentioned in your notes. So let's start with homogamy. The homogamous type of self pollination is mainly occurs in the open flowers or chasmogamous type of flowers. So in open flowers, the homogamy happens when the anther and the stigma are brought together by growth, bending, or folding. So the anther are easily passed to the or easily reached to the stigma by its growth of the flower part. They can easily land to the stigma part. Here is an example of homogamy also, that is marvelous plant in marvelous flower. The next one is clastogamy. The clastogamy mainly occurs in closed type of flowers, and they not require any type of pollinator. The growth of the style brings the pollen grain in contact with stigma and fertilization is occur. This type is called clastogamy. The next one is bud pollination. What happens in bud pollination? The new word, that is bud. What do you think? What happens in bud pollination? Anther and stigma of intersexual or the perfect flower ripen before the opening of the bud, so that self pollination takes place as the rule. That means there is no need, the incompatibility of a flower is overcome by this process, by this method, in which there is no need of any other pollinator, because anther and stigma ripen before the opening of the bud. Here are some example of bud pollination also, that is pea, wheat, and rice. Now the second type of self pollination, that is geotnogamy, that I mentioned. Pollen grain of one flower are transferred to the stigma of another flower of the same plant, or we can say the same species or genetically similar flower. This type of pollination is called geotnogamy. So here the self pollination is complete. In the next video we will discuss about the cross pollination in flowering plants. Thank you.